Hello and welcome to this presentation where I'm going to explain how you can use middleware to augment the functionality of the Microapps platform. We're going to split the presentation into two main sections, the first of which is an overview of what middleware can offer you generically, and then the second is an example that I've built in conjunction with Robert Brecker. I'd like to give you an overview of what middleware can do for you, what it can enable you to do in the context of Citrix Microapps. So here we have a schematic of what Microapps looks like without middleware. You have your user on the left, sitting in their Citrix workspace, interacting with the backend on the Citrix Microapp platform. You can define service actions, data loading endpoints, webhook listeners, and these enable you to do things like change records on the system of record. Sure, I'll provide that service for you. Get data that you're looking for, present it as a notification to the user, or in the case of webhook listeners, wait for an event to occur that you're interested in on the system of record and let that produce a new notification. So what does that look like in the builder? Well, you would add a new HTTP integration. We're going to integrate with an example SOR, and the base URL for that will be example.com. Right, so now if we want to define a data loading endpoint, everything would be in relation to example.com. This is our base URL. So if we wanted to get the users in this fictional example, we might have an extension in their API called /users. But what about if we want to add middleware? Well, in that case, then you'll need to return to your configuration screen because we're not going to be addressing the base URL, the system of record directly. When you have middleware in your architecture, you're going to be addressing mymiddleware.com or similar, wherever you're hosting it. So what does this look like? Let's go back to the diagram. This puts a service in between the Microapp platform and the system of record. For example, if you're defining a data loading endpoint, you have some kind of HTTP triggered service in a middleware that receives the request from the Microapp platform and then does some kind of transformation before or after it contacts the system of record on your behalf. The only stipulation is that you have to then convert the data once you've got it in the format that you would like before you send it back. Now, this enables you to do a bunch of really interesting things because you can transform the data however you want. It opens up a really huge array of use cases. I really recommend you going and checking out another breakout session from Envision IT, and they are using something called Microsoft Power Automate as a middleware. You can also write your own code and host it on a cloud provider such as AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. My other recommendation for inspiring you with different use cases that this kind of thing can enable is to go to this URL here, developer.cloud.com/Citrix Workspace, where you will be presented with this page. Now navigate to Build Workspace Microapp Integrations and look for the Middleware Design Patterns article. At the bottom of this, there's a really great integration built by a Citrix, and this demonstrates how this middleware architecture allows you to actually provide services for systems of record which don't have APIs at all. In this example, what is done is that an HTML canteen menu is requested, and then that is passed by a function in the middleware such that it can be converted to JSON and presented to users in Citrix Workspace. So you can see how this middleware allows you to be hugely extensible. You can pass requests straight through, or you can manipulate them. You can rely on authorization directly with the system of record, or indeed you can pass authorization via the middleware. And I'd like to move on in our next section to talking about something that we've built using middleware with Microapps. So now I'd like to present an example of an integration that we've built which uses middleware, and we're integrating this time with Office 365. So this is what our integration looks like to the end user. They can interact with their Outlook calendar and their email via these screens here. There's various notifications, for example, upcoming meetings or new meeting requests. And you can send emails directly from within the workspace, as well as be notified of high priority emails or emails from your manager. So what does the architecture of this solution look like? Well, on the right here, we've got the system of record, which in this case is Microsoft Office 365. We're interacting with that via the Microsoft Graph API. Here we have our middleware, which is hosted on Azure as a web app. And then finally here we have the Microapp platform and Citrix workspace as usual. Authentication happens directly between the Microapps platform and the system of record in this case, and we're using OAuth 2.0. As an aside, this middleware can actually be found on GitHub. If you search for Citrix Workspace and look for Microapps middleware sample 0365, here you'll find the code for the middleware, the Microapp integration itself, as well as a README with instructions for how you can host this and deploy it on your own Azure instance. So what I'm going to start with is a quick look at how we've implemented service actions in this architecture. I will use sending an email as an example. So the end user, will open the send email microapp in their Citrix workspace environment, choose a recipient, a subject, and fill in the message and click send. That will send an HTTP request to the Microapps platform, where a service action is implemented to send it on to the middleware. The middleware in this case simply passes it directly through to the system of record, i.e. rerouting or changing the destination URL address. Because we've already authenticated between the system of record and the Microapp platform, this request here has a bearer token that is valid in the authorization header. So the Microapps, the Azure middleware can make use of that and authorize its own request to the SOR. Let's see how this looks like in practice. So here we have our workspace end user called Joni, and she would like to send an email to her colleague Nesta. So she'll open her email microapp, address Nesta, her colleague. Hi there, sent from Citrix workspace, and click send. As I said, this will now trigger an HTTP request to the Microapps platform. So let's go there and see what happened. Here we have the Microapps platform, and this is our integration. You can see 3 Microapps here. The one we were just interacting with was email send. And this is the Outlook integration that it sits within. Let's have a look at this integration. We've implemented a service action called send email. And you can look at the logs for this. Show log, and we should see that at the time now, which is 1:42 p.m. when I'm recording this, that yes, so around about this time, what we had was a service action triggered sending on to the middleware, which is hosted here on azurewebsites.net. We can double check and look, yes, our subject was hi there, and the body, the content is sent from Citrix Workspace. So now let's move on to the middleware and see what that did with the request. Now we're in our Microsoft Azure environment for the web app, and we're looking at a log stream live of that web app running. So let's look for send mail. And we can see that, yep, the middleware received a request from the Microapps platform, and what it does is it has rerouted it to the Microsoft Graph API on the system of record with a send mail request. Response 202. So hopefully that worked. And we can look at Nesta's inbox. Here we have our colleague Nesta, and here is the email he just received from Joni Sherman sent from Citrix Workspace. So this is great. This is a look at how service actions work with our architecture. But what about going in the other direction? What about notifications? So let's demo that now. What I'm going to do from Nestor's Microsoft Outlook environment is open his calendar, and we'll have a new event. Let's schedule tomorrow, the day after I'm recording this at least, a meeting about budgets, and we will invite Joni. Let's have this meeting on Zoom. We'll click send. Event created, and that invite has been sent to Joni. What we're aiming for here is for a notification to appear in her workspace environment. So let's go back to our architecture diagram and see how that is implemented. Right, so what we have here is an implementation that uses webhooks. Webhooks are things that you define, a relatively new feature. They're URLs which you define within your Microapps platform building environment, and they're listening out for events on a system of record. As you can see on the right here, an event occurs, and eventually that information works its way back to a webhook listener. As you can also see, there's a bunch of other things that happen on the way to set that up. So let's start from the beginning. What we have is a data loading call from our Microapps platform to the Azure web app. What this data loading call needs to do is transmit a few key pieces of information. It needs to tell the middleware that there's an email webhook URL and there's a calendar webhook URL waiting here, ready to receive information. And it needs to give the middleware permission, in a sense, to ask things of the SOR on its behalf by providing it with a bearer token, which it's obtained using OAuth 2.0. The middleware can then store these key pieces of information, the webhook URLs and the bearer token, in some kind of permanent storage, whatever makes sense for your implementation. This could be a database, on disk, whatever. Once the middleware has that information, it can then make subscriptions to email events and calendar events on behalf of the Microapp platform. So here we can see it's sending to Microsoft Graph API. Please subscribe me to email events and calendar events. Here's a bearer token. I'm authorized to do this. What it also sends is the handle callback URL, because what we want is for our middleware to intercept the events, as you can see on the line below here. The next thing that happens, and what I just triggered with sending a calendar invite to Joni from Nestor, is that an event has occurred. There's a new calendar invite, there's a new meeting on the system of record. Because we subscribe to calendar events, this will trigger one of the webhooks. And what we're going to do is receive that in the handle callback URL. What this function here in the middleware will need to do is make a few extra calls after it receives that information. Yes, there was a meeting created, but the middleware wants to know more things. It wants to know what is the subject of this meeting? What is the location? Who is the organizer? So there's a bit of back and forth between the middleware and the system of record to get all the information that is required. Finally, once it's got that information, it can send it back on to the calendar webhook URL with all the information that we need for our end user. In this case, it has a subject, which is budgets, a location, Zoom, and an organizer, Nestor. Once the webhook listener receives this, it can put the information in a cache where a notification is generated in the usual way. So fingers crossed, if we go to Joni's environment, we can see that we have our new notification for the meeting budgets, which Nestor has sent us. So to wrap up, what does middleware offer us for the Microapps platform? It basically offers us complete extensibility. It allows you to transform HTTP requests, transform the data within them which allows you to do things like integrate with non-REST APIs, even resources that don't have APIs at all, in the example I mentioned of the canteen menu, which was simply an HTML web page, which we used a cloud function to parse and deliver information finally into the Microapps platform. You can write middleware as real code, or you can use low-code solutions such as Microsoft Power Automate. And what I want you to go away and do is to think about what middleware can do for you in terms of getting your use cases off the ground. Thanks for listening, and any questions, please ask me on the Slack channel.